Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Climate, a weekly webcast series from ecoAmerica featuring dynamic discussions with local and national leaders. We offer diverse perspectives and bring forth the latest thinking and best practices for building public support and political resolve for equitable climate solutions in the US. But before we jump in today, here are some quick reminders. This session is being recorded and it will be available on ecoAmerica's YouTube channel afterwards. Make sure you're engaging with us online using the hashtag Let's Talk Climate throughout our discussion and in the days and months to come. And please use the chat function to ask questions throughout the webcast. You can send your questions to us by choosing the all panelists from the dropdown in the chat box, and ecoAmerica staff are ready to answer tech questions and facilitate Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. So again, I'm Annie Fett-Cruz. I'm the director of BlessedTomorrow at ecoAmerica. And while we're all tuning in virtually, I'm hosting from Vienna, Virginia, which I honor as the ancestral home of the Manahoic people. And I'm excited to welcome you. So on today's Let's Talk Climate episode, which is titled Sacred Home, Creating Shelter, Building Resilience, and Living Carbon Neutral, we're talking to faith organizations who are supporting individuals of faith and entire faith communities in living their faith values by taking action to pursue climate justice, climate action, and climate advocacy at the local level. But before I introduce them, I want to point your attention to an incredible set of additional conversations on this topic that took place during our American Climate Leadership Summit about a month ago. We featured several conversations with experts who provided guidance for individual action and ways that we all can lead together, but also that can actually influence bold systemic change. And this particularly took place on day 3 of the summit, but there are references and examples throughout the summit. You can find all of those videos available on demand on the ecoAmerica YouTube channel. So as we often say, we know the rubber hits the road locally, and it's that sustained local action and advocacy that can really make a difference and provide the kinds of success stories for other communities and local, state, and federal policymakers in their attempts to pass and implement climate solutions. So I want to welcome my guests, and I'll introduce them now. We're honored to welcome the Reverend Dr. Ambrose Carroll, who is CEO and founder of Green the Church, and Becky O'Brien, who is the Director of Food and Climate at Hazon. So hello, and thanks so much for being here, everyone.
Hello, indeed. Thanks for having us.
Oh, wonderful.
Glad to be here today.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to just ask you both, if we think big picture, people who are listening may be asking, okay, the climate crisis is so big. Can I, as one person, really make a difference? And I'm curious how you both answer that question. So Becky, maybe I'll start with you, and then Reverend Ambrose, you can follow.
Great, thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for hosting this conversation. And I think that's a wonderful and terrible question to start with, because I could talk about it for the entire time, but I won't. Or we'll see if I won't. So this morning I was at a funeral, and it was for someone named Nanette Mannheimer. And she was a founder of my synagogue, Congregation Har Hashem in Boulder, Colorado. And there's nothing like hearing a eulogy and watching a casket go into the ground to give you perspective on a life. And one of the things my rabbi said about her is that how she really modeled that the human spirit cannot be stifled. And I thought, wow, that's the message I'm going to carry today into this session, talking about what an individual can do. So in Nanette's memory, I also want to share about another wise elder. There's a woman named Granny Haddock, Doris Haddock, and she was an activist. And when she was 89 years old, she walked more than 3,000 miles across the country for the issue that she cared about, that she was working for. And here's what she said: aren't we privileged to live in a time when everything is at stake, and when our efforts make a difference in the eternal contest between the forces of light and shadow, between togetherness and division, between justice and exploitation? Oh, be joyful that you are a warrior in this great time. Be joyful. And what I hear so much out there, and what I'll admit I have absolutely experienced myself, is a sense of overwhelm and grief and depression and impotence. And I am convinced that the reason that she was joyful to be a warrior is because she put one foot in front of the next. It was very clear to her that what she did mattered. And the more that we do things, the more that we feel that way. It's kind of a really good feedback loop of if I act like I matter, I feel like I matter. If I feel like I matter, act like I matter, and doing both. And actually, I have like numerous points to make on this. I'll just make one more and then pause. There's a teaching from the Jewish tradition from a book called The Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot. And the teaching is that it is not on me to complete the task, but neither am I free to desist. And the thing is that who's not an individual? We are all individuals. If an individual can't make a difference, then no one can make a difference. But it's not my part to do millions of other people's. It's only my part to do my part, but it is my part to do my part. So those are some of my thoughts on that. And I could go further, and maybe I will, but I'll pause.
All right, I'm sitting here saying amen inside. Go ahead, Reverend Ambrose.
Yeah, again, I mean, it is a power pack question, and there's definitely a duality to it. I mean, you definitely, have to embrace what we have to do individually, but I think that the collective is also important. I was actually reading On Fire by Naomi Klein. And she spoke of being in an area in Asia and noticing that although the poor working class who work and build computers, but they've never used computers, right? Those who work as a community for workers' rights and social uplift can be found wearing the gear and brand of some of the multinational companies that pay them wages by the penny and not by the dollar. What she learned is that they did not think about struggle from an individual vantage point. Perhaps not being from the West, they don't put as much stock into rugged individualism, individual piety, or individual power. It actually blew my mind that when it comes to the ravages of climate change, that the statement that Klein seemed to give was that individually we can do nothing to avert climate change. But it is what we as sentient beings would be found doing together is what will save humanity on this crusted earth. Now to your question and for our musings today, let me acknowledge the wisdom of sages and to state, as the ancients who watch the stars would say, as above, so below. That is to say that what we do for the planet collectively, that we must also do for ourselves individually. We must work to be in balance as individuals for the sake of our own health and longevity upon the planet. So there are practices that are good for us to do regardless of if they save the planet or not. We must do them because they are the highest expression of mature life and living. We must do those things that are good and right for the sake of being good and right, for as long as we share the breath of life with all things that inhale and exhale. It's like, I know that the planet is important. I know that climate change is important. We look at the figures, and if we can turn back the clock, it's not the planet that's in danger. It's us as human beings, our existence upon the planet, that is in danger. But if my brother, the bumblebee, survives and there are no more human beings, I'll still shout glory, right? Because yet life itself thrives. Yeah.
No, I think this concept of duality here is that tension that people are feeling, but I think it's the kind of the illumination you both are making here for how we might set ourselves in this work is really helpful. And I know we're going to dive in even more. So stick with us, everyone, because here's another one. So I think some on this call hear differing opinions, right, on the value of individual action and really focusing on policy change. And that by organizations like ours talking about individual action? Are we taking away from the importance of really focusing on the policy advocacy that needs to happen in order to influence those big changes sweeping changes that can happen through policy? And so I'm curious if you can talk about that dynamic, like what we've been talking about with that specific dynamic. And Becky or Ambrose, I'm happy for either one of you to get started.
Sure. So one of the first things that came to mind was a quote from the author Jonathan Safran Foer. He wrote a book called We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast. Ostensibly, it's a book about the connection between our food choices and industrial animal agriculture and climate change. I think it's actually kind of a treatise on, does it matter what I do, really, at the end of the day? And it was actually that book that helped me reach what feels pretty final of a conclusion about that, yes, my choices matter, because as long as I've been in this work for a quarter of a century, I have often questioned that, and my questioning days are over. And something that he shared was a lot of that interconnectedness that Rev Carol was just really sharing about. Unless you buy, this is what he says, unless you buy your food in secret and eat it in a closet, you don't eat alone. Our food choices are social contagions, always influencing others around us. Supermarkets track each item sold. Restaurants adjust their menus to demand. Food services looks at what gets thrown away, and we order what she's having. We eat as families, communities, generations, nations, and increasingly as a globe. Individual consumer choices can activate collective action, that it's generative, it's not paralyzing. He says we couldn't stop our eating from radiating influence even if we wanted to. We couldn't stop our eating from radiating influence even if we wanted to. And what really just gets me a little bit at a pet peeve is what can be, to me, I experienced a little bit of infighting within our movement about you're going about saving the world the wrong way. This is the right way to do it. And there's no silver bullet. We need all efforts, all strategies. And we can as individuals, me choosing to be vegetarian and leaning vegan does not preclude me also calling the USDA and the FDA and my senators and the White House and my school district. I do all of those things. And I actually am more inclined to do the corporate and political action because of my personal choices. And a little bit of what would feel to me kind of like hypocrisy of operating at those levels, saying you need to stop doing these things. I'm going to go home and still do them, but you should stop. So part of that is like just my own moral integrity and living out the Jewish values that are my faith. And so yeah, just that there's no silver bullet, and to kind of shame or denigrate one form of change and activism because it somehow cancels out another. The truth is we need all of the above.
Amen. I always like to say we need everybody and we need everything. Reverend Dr. Amos Brown, senior pastor of the historic Third Baptist Church of San Francisco, where I was a youth pastor, taught us that the gospel always flies on two wings: grace and mercy, yin and yang. And I've learned that in life, you've got to pray like it all depends on God, because it does. And then you've got to work like it all depends on you, because it does. And it's the same with embracing individual action for the sake of your spirit walk, and at the same time embracing our corporate witness towards policy change. We must live in both worlds. Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, our new U.S. Senator from the state of Georgia and pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, wrote a book entitled The Divided Mind of the Black Church. And he examines the divide between the theology of the academy towards an international liberation theology and that of the local assembly in both urban and rural centers that focus primarily on personal piety. And I believe that it's our job as practical theologians to bring balance to the force. We have to learn how to walk and chew gum at the same time. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to dig in a little bit deeper, Reverend Ambrose, with some of the work that you're specifically doing. I know you just referenced the Black church, and that Green the Church is really an effort aimed at trying to uplift and center the important work and power of the historically Black church in this space. And I'm curious, how do you see action of individuals and congregations playing a part in achieving those goals? And maybe you can talk a little bit about the different ways that you go about that.
Yeah, well, of course, I work, of course, with the interfaith societies, but primarily with the Black church. And I don't have to tell you that the Black church is not monolithic. It is not one thing, but it is many things. So Green the Church has set off to tell stories of Black churches and individuals participating in multifaceted ways in the environmental and sustainability space. There's a lot to learn. However, Green the Church does not sit itself as a teacher, but rather we curate the stories so that more individuals and congregations might be inspired to begin to chronicle their own movement in this space. We pull the Black church together in order for it to become more weighty, in order for it to build its own center of gravity to pull others into its matrix. So when you come to our website at www.greenthechurch.org, you see a plethora of stories of the Black church in food sovereignty, building efficiency. I always say we may not own a lot of skyscrapers downtown, but we own a lot of faith buildings. Many of them storefronts, a great deal of them cathedrals. That because our grandparents sold chicken dinners and sweet potato pies, but they bought these buildings and they had what they call note burning services, right? And so sometimes we find ourselves crying with a loaf of bread under our arms, where we can look at just taking care of what we have, right? Being good stewards is something that will help us reduce our carbon footprint. But we also tell stories about churches that are doing renewable energy, conservation, God in nature, green theology, environmental justice, public health, and so on and so forth. These individual stories, we hope, will help to inspire a nationwide movement.
And I'm curious, and I want to get to Becky here in a moment to talk about some of the work that she's doing, but I'm curious, Reverend Ambrose, are there barriers or challenges that you encounter with clergy or lay leadership in adopting sustainable practices and encouraging them to do this work? And if so, how do you overcome that?
Yeah, good question. At Green the Church, we spend a lot of time connecting with the lowest hanging fruit. So for us, when we talk about who in the Black church has good eating habits, we connect with and tell stories about the Black 7-day Adventist, who in our communities have always kept kosher diets and practice vegetarianism or have vegan diets. We lean in on the good news of some in the Black church to help it inspire those who have not held these practices over the years. If we can get Baptists and Methodists to share a meal and conversation with 7-day Adventists and our Muslim brothers and sisters, then out of respect and candor of sitting with new friends, they will more readily break bread with one another, so to speak. So instead of, trying to make the hard sell with congregations that, may not be, I just got off the line. We were meeting with American Baptist ministers in Northern California. We met with ABCOT, and the notion of, sometimes we have people who want to do good things, who want to connect with the Black community. But when you come to the Black church and knock on its door, we're often met with suspicion. I think that's for good reason. I was on a call the other day with individuals in the city of Berkeley, and they asked, do they feel safe in Berkeley? And while I would have thought, people would have started talking about robberies or homicides or, kids not being safe at home, the conversation with these African Americans was, no, we don't feel safe because of the police, right? And these are grandmothers, right? They say they're just not as nice as they used to be. Or my nephews stand on the corner and the police start circling faster, right? And so these communities that have sometimes been under siege because in order for the community to feel safe, the harsh militarized police presence is for others in the community to feel safe, and those in black bodies then feel under siege by that. So I said all of that and painted that picture because even when you show up and say, you know, can I change your light bulbs? I remember I was in Colorado and we had started the Colorado Green Jobs Interfaith Coalition. And we went to a church. We were trying to give them $5 to build their infrastructure. And we sat around the table, and one of the women raised her hand. She said, well, if we take this $5,000, are we going to have to change our Christian education program? And I was like, huh? You know, mm-hmm. Because we know that there are those and a lot of, you know, so you got police brutality, you got crime, you've got so many other issues that it's difficult with probably 70% of black churches to get this and move. But what we do at Green the Church is we find people who are already doing the work, and we showcase that work, and we make sure that they have resources so that they can further the work, and we highlight the work so that once they are doing it in communities, other pastors, deacons, trustees say, hey, I see what you all are doing. How can we also get some of those things done for ourselves? So that's our approach at Green the Church, to tell the story and to be prayerful, and then let Spirit come in and do what Spirit does.
And we hear that so often, you know, especially, I mean, nowadays with what, you know, just everyone's dealing with some major crises, you know, and then there's so many to choose from these days. And for some more than others, unfortunately. And that idea of connecting the dots here, so people understand, yes, we understand that, or, you know, I know that these are the priorities for me and my community. And I understand now, because someone's told the story, how sustainability, environmental justice, climate change actually impact those things that I already care about. It's so powerful.
That's it.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. Becky, I'm curious, with Hazon, there's this effort called Hazon, which is the specific individual commitment concept. And I was curious if you'd share a little bit about that, and maybe your work generally as well.
Yeah, well, at Hazon, we also have a program called the Hazon Seal of Sustainability, and similar to the Green the Church efforts, really looking to support and build the existing leaders, the existing champions who are out there that care passionately about these issues. And they're, you know, it's one or a handful of people in an institution that's touching 200, 300, 400, 800 households. And they want to be making change there. And going back to what Rev Carol was sharing earlier, like the way that we can affect change in community. And so what we created there was this program where we supported them creating green teams, getting executives sign on, and then creating a roadway, a pathway with resources and networking and support along the way to do 2 to 3 sustainability projects over the period of a year. And then in most cases to renew for another year and keep going. And one of the things that we realized actually as an organization that we had actually a little bit of a gap in was options for individuals to get involved and get support to make change in their own lives. We offer fellowships, which a handful of people could come and participate in. We have a national conference that hundreds of people would come to, but you know, we'd like to reach thousands and thousands of people. And so we created a program called the Brit Hazon, and Brit is actually the word for covenant. And one of the exciting things about doing work in environmental work in a faith-based area is that you can kind of talk about making covenants. We can talk about this work as being sacred and important, soulful work. And so we didn't choose the name Brit Hazon lightly. Hazon, by the way, is the Hebrew word for vision, and ours is a healthier, more sustainable, equitable world in the Jewish community and for all. And so the Brit Hazon is a way for people to commit to raising their voice, giving of their time and or their money to environmental causes, and making a personal commitment to change. And when you sign up for the Brit Hazon, we have 6 categories of commitments that you can make. And you sign up for a 6-week commitment that I'm going to experiment with this behavior for the next 6 weeks. And we give specific actions and then provide the resources and encouragement to help people actually stick to it and achieve it and continue it. And, 6 weeks is considered a pretty reasonable time to establish new habits. And so the idea is that hopefully some of these things are sticking for people for much longer. And it's the start of a journey or someone taking something to the next level. And it's something for people who are maybe for the first time really thinking about doing anything like this, as well as for people who've been at it for years and that would looking to take it to the next level. And so I think we did an okay job of it being both an entry point and a next step wherever you are with your journey.
So great. That concept of providing on-ramps, different on-ramps for where someone is, and then encouraging them to lean in for a substantial amount of time, but enough time, like you said, to help behavior change.
And one of the things that we're doing, and I'd be curious to hear from you, Rev Carol, if you think this is something that would resonate in your communities, is that we've found that we've been pushing it out there as an individual program. You sign up. But what we're actually finding is that groups of people want to sign up as groups. And so we have a synagogue, or there's these organizations called Moishe houses, which are Jewish centers for young adults in the kind of 20 to 30 range. And they are wanting to sign up as groups and kind of challenging each other. And so they're kind of signing up and saying, we want to get at least 50 people from our community signed up to do this. And it can parallel work that they're doing at their institutional level, organizational level, but also them doing it in their homes, because that's part of the beauty of working in these communities. It's wonderful to get a church or a synagogue or a mosque to switch out their light bulbs or to change the food that they're serving. They're reaching huge numbers. They have much larger carbon footprints than our households, but it's also a pretty efficient way to reach the hundreds of families that go there and think, oh, maybe I could change the lights at my house. Oh, maybe I could try that food at my house. And so we're changing at the organizational level and the individual level. And so it's been interesting for us to see the evolution of the BREAT being something we kind of thought of as an individual thing that now people are kind of wanting to take to being more of a group and collective projects. We're excited about that. And I would wonder if there would be a parallel scenario in the Black church.
And if you check, I already hit you up in the chat. I was like, we need something like that, right? Because again, we're talking to pastors, talking to people, but often it's not necessarily the pastor. It's not necessarily the head of the trustees who's coming, right? It's those individuals. And when they're looking at how they can onboard, how they can be a part. And we haven't touched that as of yet. So would love to see what you guys are doing. Exciting.
Yeah, I'd love to share it. Yeah, absolutely.
And if there's anything else that comes from that conversation that you would like to share with us, we can share it with the audience as well.
And anybody can sign up for the BREAT Hazon. There's no faith test to participate, so anyone can sign up.
Great. So I know, so Reverend Carol talked about food sovereignty, and obviously food being one of the core programmatic areas that you cover with Hazon. Becky, I wanted to kind of lift up the food and diet practices that kind of as a part of our lives where individual action can really make a difference. And I'm curious if you could talk about what this means to you and your organizations, and how you work to help others consider and adopt a more sustainable diet and lifestyle, or think about food production as a source of carbon pollution. Either one of you.
Me first. Okay. So for me, the food conversation, coming to the world late 60s and living in inner cities, and taking up just a lot of practices that are part of that were very purposefully kind of placed in our communities. Food conversation is always an important conversation. You're talking about people who came sometimes from places where some food stuff was scarce, right? People who grew up eating a lot of fresh vegetables, a lot of leafy vegetables, and would have minimal amounts of protein, but came up out of places like Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, began to make salaries where they would feast once or twice a year. They began to feast every week, right? And so I think the question is, or the notion is, that knowledge is power, right? So when you know better, you begin to do better. Choices, and even empowering yourself to think that you even have choices, because sometimes food is so scarce that a food-like substance will work. It feeds your belly, right? And to choose either a food-like substance or no food for some has been not a choice at all. So I entered this thought and this question thinking about my dad, who pastored churches, North Carolina, St. Louis, Missouri, Santa Ana, Orange County, and Oakland. But he died at the age of 44 from a stroke. He was preaching in Nashville, Tennessee, after our National Baptist Congress, of which he had been teaching all week. And this was back in like 1983. And Daddy didn't drink, he didn't smoke, but he had a high-stress job, and he was raised on a farm, and was an agriculture major in college. And I, like him, suffer from high cholesterol, and a large part of that is diet. But I also grew up in a food desert with stores and fast food restaurants in my neighborhood that specialized in high fructose food-like substances. My 12-year-old son, who suffers from asthma, was just diagnosed with high cholesterol, along with my 7-year-old daughter. The truth is that I perhaps had high cholesterol as a child as well and never knew it. My father perhaps had it as a child himself and did not know it. In fact, I just learned that I have lipoprotein numbers that are 5 times greater than they should be. I'm 52 years old and just learning about something that my father perhaps should have learned about from his healthcare provider in 1982. I'm going in with my family in 2 weeks for deeper analysis and to sit with dietitians. Along with my addiction to sugar, this is perhaps the most important battle of my individual spiritual life, and the life of my family. I understand that there are countless other reasons to change dietary patterns, but for the Black community, like in all other areas of our lives, sometimes it comes down to mere survival, right? And so, definitely there are pictures, there are some African American religion traditions, right, that have stayed closer to the law, right, of the law that is divine. Like we grew up from a New Testament pattern that said, "Rise, Peter, slay and eat," right? You showed the sheet; it was everything, right? You can have whatever you want. And so when you look at theology and look at the importance of theology, good theology, bad theology, good Bible, bad Bible, right? That there are lessons that were attempted and shared in order for people to live how they wanted to live. But the reality of what you put in your body and how you take care of the planet, there are laws that if those laws are broken, right, that we cannot have a different outcome. And so for me, the food conversation is really central. And when we talk about environmentalism and sustainability, it is the food conversation for a lot of our communities because we're suffering with hypertension. We're suffering with high cholesterol, asthma. It is now how we treat our bodies and us learning anew and getting back to some of the practices that we had pre-slavery, right? Or even pre-Northern migration in the 40s, to get back to some of those practices that became obtruse, practices that became, we didn't want to identify with being able to grow food. Like when we came to California, everybody had chickens and everybody was growing food. They said, y'all got to stop all that country stuff. You live in the city now, So we've got to, so for us, the conversation lies there first. And I think it's been a powerful on-ramp as we talk about veganism, vegetarianism, and seeing the growth of that movement in the Black community. So those are some of my thoughts.
Powerful testimony. Thank you for sharing. Becky, you want
Wow.
to share?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when I think about it's also so much interconnected, and I think about how we can separate climate change and health reasons, but like we care about climate because we care about our health.
Yes.
As you said, I mean, the line I'm taking away from this is my brother, the bumblebee. Like to think about the fact that we need our brothers and sisters, the bumblebees, and they don't so much need us. In fact, lately it seems like they might be better without us. I'm not quite sure where we fit in with them, but we're not doing them a lot of favors right now with our behavior. But climate change is about asthma. It is about being able to breathe. It is about being able to grow food in the places where we live, and it's happening real and here now. And so being that I am just that one person, one of the reasons that it's exciting for me to be working on food is that it does in fact check off a lot of boxes. And so I'm our director of food and climate. So a focus for me is on the connection between food and climate change, but within a broader Jewish environmental organization, and just more broadly, a human organization, is that when we work on our food choices, we're addressing issues of food justice. We're addressing issues of hunger. We're addressing issues of worker justice. We're addressing issues of biodiversity, animal welfare. There are so many things that are important when we work on food. And if we start to pivot away from industrial animal agriculture and to more sustainable food systems, it's helping, and not to mention everything that Rev Carol just shared, our personal health. All those things will be better. So I'm coming at it from an angle of climate, but it feels really great that if we do this, it's helping like 10 other things at least. And that feels really powerful. And so that's one of the reasons as an organization, we've really doubled down our investment in focusing on this and encouraging people to be looking at their food choices for any reason, but especially if you're have environmental concerns. I was just reading today from the Global Forest Coalition. They recently shared that unsustainable food production systems are the main cause of the destruction of forests and other ecosystems worldwide, and a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. Industrial livestock and feedstock production is one of the main culprits. It is the primary cause of deforestation in South America, which has the highest deforestation rate of any continent. And unless the current rise in meat and dairy consumption is halted, livestock farming will be responsible for more than half of all greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And we know from Project Drawdown, one of the preeminent research organizations around climate, reducing food waste and transitioning to plant-rich diets are in the top 4 actions that we can be taking out of like all the actions. And a lot of what that comes down to, like the quick science lesson, is that, we're really used to thinking about carbon dioxide and hearing about its impact. But methane has 86 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. And we know we're talking about the next 20 years being the critical years. And nitrous oxide has about 300 times the global warming potential. So they are better at the heat trapping. So if we are like, we need to get this thing arrested and then in fact start drawing down, that's what the name Project Drawdown comes from, we need to be looking at methane and nitrous oxide, and the livestock sector, industrial animal agriculture, is the culprit for those things and why they are spiking. And so being able to bring those down, that's why they're so potent. Plus, if while you're doing that, you're addressing all the other myriad issues that are problematic with industrial animal agriculture besides their contributions to climate change, it's really powerful. And the other thing is that it's really quite accessible. It can feel really overwhelming to think like, how am I going to get solar panels on my roof? How am I going to get an electric car? How am I going to go to DC to lobby my senator? Like there's a lot of things that can feel really overwhelming. We're all eating several times a day. Most of us are eating several times a day, some eating fewer than several times a day. But we have a lot of choices. Some of us have fewer than others. That's absolutely true. And that's one of the things that we can be doing at the systemic level and the holistic level, is making easier choices more accessible for everyone. And some of the most exciting things happening in this movement is looking at schools and school food, where something like 60 billion meals a year are being served, and is a primary source of nutrition for low-income families. And so at the systemic level, things need to be changing. But at a personal level, there's things that we can do, and it doesn't require big investments. You don't have to buy new things for your kitchen and things like that. So it's just feels like a really accessible way into making personal change, and you can do it in baby steps. There's no all or nothing. None of this is about you've got to be a vegan tomorrow and never eat meat again. That's not any of what this is talking about. It's really about finding where you can make some change, do some learning, dip your foot in the pool, try that. Okay, now try the next thing, and maybe you're building, or maybe you don't like that and you're going to go in a different direction. But I would say we are not free to desist. Our tradition teaches we aren't free to just bystand and take a pass on this. And so food feels like a really powerful place to be making a difference.
Well, thank you both for sharing that. I wanted to point out, my colleague chatted a resource here that just as a helpful data point for those who like data points on this, but that our most recent research showed that health is actually the top motivator, even over economic, the job creation. So across demographics, when we're looking at, race or gender or age or political affiliation, that health is a major motivator. And also, the language, like you both said, it doesn't have to be sacrificial, right? So if we're focusing on the benefits, the health benefits in particular, and as a community working towards creating, greater access, that this doesn't have to be couched or framed in sacrificial language. It's, we're doing this to improve our community, improve our health, and support access to food, healthy food in our communities. So,
yeah, I think Rev Carol would back me up on this. We are not talking about a future of deprivation. We are talking about a future that is joyous, that is whole, that is nourishing, and that is fulfilling. This is not a vision of sacrifice at all. It's really quite joyous. Dr. Ilana Elizabeth Johnson talks about, we need a vision that is joyous and irresistible. And I see it. And as you were talking about, at a certain time when, this is how we lived. Like people we could never live that way. And I'm like, actually, this is kind of how society always was till the last few decades.
Right.
Like nobody was eating pineapples in January in Colorado. That was not
right. We are out of balance. Right. Right. We are out of balance. We've taken things out of sync. Right. We have not respected the natural ebb and flow. The earth is on automatic. And if we allow her to move and move along with her, then we'll be at a place of abundance. And
it's a joyful ride.
That's right.
Back to Granny's call to action. Well, I want to ask you both an important question here, and then maybe we'll take a question or two from the audience. So if you had recommendations for 5 things that a person could do this year to make a meaningful impact on their individual carbon footprint, what would you recommend? 5 things. Who wants to start?
I'll give it mine first. Eat less meat, recycle, compost, get an energy retrofit. Instead of driving or flying to the front lines, support the work of organizations that are on the front lines who are battling the deprivations caused by climate change.
Amen.
I could just say ditto. But I guess like a little nuance I would say is be a little more be specific with yourself. So I'm right there with eat less meat, or eat less industrially produced meat. And what I would say is give yourself a specific what you mean by that. For me, I decided I was going to have 1 meal a day that had no animal products in it at all. And so Another option could be find one animal product that you eat and find a substitute for it that you really like. That's another thing that I've done is switch from cow dairy to nut and oat dairies. And I found ones that I really like. And it took a little bit of experimenting to find the 2 or 3 that are in my regular rotation that really do it for me. But I'd have to like figure it out that first day. So pick one action that feels manageable, and because what does less mean? Like I just did one less scoop at the buffet last Thursday, so that counts. So I would say give yourself a little bit of a specificity there with any of those actions. And so I would be down with that. With reducing food waste, another one that I would say there is another example is just become really good friends with your freezer, and things that there's almost anything can get frozen and be used in a different way. And then also I'll do the specificity thing, but one thing that I'll add to the list that wasn't shared already is try and buy secondhand whenever you can. A lot of what's happening out there in terms of creating trauma to our environment and depleting our resources, creating more new stuff. And we're filling our landfills with old stuff. And it can kind of become an adventure. I can tell you we've wanted new cushions for some chairs we have outside that the squirrels and weather have destroyed. And I could go on it any second online or run out to a store and buy them. And I'm just like not letting myself do it. This week I found some used ones and they're in brand new condition and I'm getting them for a steal. And it's really clear to me the supply line. If you haven't watched The Story of Stuff, for every trash can we take out to the curb, there are 70 behind us in the supply chain to create all those things that got to us, 70. So for me, I don't want to contribute to those 70 that are invisible to me, that whole cradle to grave concept. So whenever you can buy secondhand, you're not creating those 70 other trash cans behind you. You're giving more life to the things that they already got created for. So anything you can do secondhand, I'd add that to the list.
Reverend Ambrose, I don't remember which social media platform it was, but you were telling a story about pulling out the mason jars from the cabinet. And I said, I opened my cabinet and there are lots of mason jars in there from spaghetti sauce or whatever
Right.
it is. We always, excuse me. Well, let me go. Go ahead.
And I've learned if you have enough of them, they can actually look like a set.
I love it. I love it. I anecdotally, I hear, at least in the DC area, but I have family in Ohio who say they're there as well. There are these great Facebook groups that have been popping up called Buy Nothing or other kinds of free groups where you can go on and ask for things or say, I'm cleaning out my house and I'd like to give this away, and just a great place to, you don't even have to buy secondhand. You can actually just ask your neighbors if they have something and maybe they'd be willing to give it to you.
Indeed. We actually have in the Breed Hazon, one of the commitment, you can commit to experimenting with a plant-rich diet. Another one is reducing your food waste. Another is buy less stuff. And one of the actions in there is about learning about the Buy Nothing groups and getting plugged into that universe. So yeah, we really encourage that. It makes a huge difference and it's fun.
Well, I want to go, there's a couple of questions that have come through from the audience and we have a few minutes left. So let's dive in. Maybe we can get to one or two. Margaret in Connecticut is asking, do you have any insight on how to encourage local churches to work together on these kinds of efforts, or congregations, synagogues, mosques, whatever it be?
Yeah, so for us, I think the reason that we started doing the Green at Church Summit was to do just that. So, like our last one was in St. Louis, Missouri, and we discovered that there were already, congregations that were doing food or some that have done solar and stuff like that. So we had the summit, and we do everything. It's church first. So we're bringing in the revivalist, right, that comes in and preaches that everybody comes to hear anyway, and we've got the gospel music and we're having great worship, and then we're sharing all of these great things that these congregations are doing. so that some of those other congregations that have not been, moving can come along and do the same. So, I think it's about highlighting congregations that are doing and just kind of showing, number one, why it is good stewardship and why and how it aligns with the mission that the congregation is on already. And then make sure that people know that people are actually having fun, because these things are fun and engaging. So,
Becky, you talked about how Hazon was encouraging people to do things as groups. Is there a way to connect the groups?
Yes, well, and so before being director of food and climate, I was actually for many years a regional director for Hazon here in Colorado, and we did a lot of work bringing together the leaders in the movement. And sometimes, I kind of fantasize about getting all the clergy together, and occasionally that's possible. And but they're some of the busiest people that there are, and so what we would also often do is just convene. We actually had a mini grant program. We did bring together all our grant recipients, and what a role as we could do as a third-party organization that wasn't one of these faith institutions is that we considered it part of our job to convene these organizations and make those connections. And so when this one was thinking about putting in a garden, we were able to connect them with 3 others who are already doing that to share their highlights. So part of it was kind of just having a central hub organization that knew who else was there. And we would host programs at different organization sites so that we could see what they were up to. Here's an organization that's already started composting, that's already on the trying to be zero waste bandwagon. And a couple of times really did like collective purchasing, like, wow, if we buy 1 trillion more compostable plates, they cost a lot less. So if 2 places get together and order together, they start getting those quantity discounts. That makes it a lot more reasonable for them to be doing these things. So we would try and make those connections here and there. At the national level, the SEAL, we bring these organizations together, not just geographically. We do that where we have hubs of several organizations at once, which we do in several places. But nationally, just are bringing these organizations together on webinars. And when we had our in-person conferences, bringing folks to our national conferences, and they could cross-pollinate there. And there's tremendous value in it. As that person was asking, it feels like extra to like, oh, I'm so busy already, one more meeting. And then you go and you're like, I'm so pumped. There's other people doing this work. I feel so depleted. And that just kind of filled me up. There's energy in that. And, I think what Rev Carol's been sharing really resonates with that as well. And so it can help to have that extra third party in the community that's organizing that. And if there's not, just bite off what's manageable that you can chew. Reach out to just one other organization, find out what they're up to, and go have tea with that person. Just start there. And maybe they know another person, and next time there's 3 people at tea, and next time there's 4. We don't have to conquer everything. I always hesitate to take people off their, you're already busy making things happen in your place. I kind of really don't want to pull you off of that. But there is that strength in numbers and community. So we do encourage that.
It's such a great way to come back to how we started, which is the idea that, the individual work is so important, but, and also, the collective work is so important, and they drive each other, right? So the individual work creates that energy and authenticity that can really help us do the collective work. And that collective work gives us the energy and kind of power to do the individual work too. So well, we do have one other question, but not a lot of time for it. But the good news is I think we already answered it. So Jorge, who's joining us from Puerto Rico, thank you, Jorge, was asking what solutions would we recommend? And you guys already shared your 5, but I also want to point Jorge and others to the resources that we've shared in the chat. And those will be summarized and put into the YouTube video that we'll have up online after this is recorded. And we also do a blog after each one of these webcasts where we also list resources that we've talked about during the webcast. So check those out. So we are unfortunately at our time today, but it's been such a wonderful conversation, Reverend Ambrose and Becky, and I just thank you so much for all of the work you're doing, for your leadership, for your joy, and for your encouragement, and also for your honesty and your truth telling, because it's, it's all of the above. Like you said, it's all of the above. So in addition to the 5 things that Reverend Ambrose and Becky have shared and encouraged you in, I also want to just point you all to the momentous statement from ecoAmerica and all of our coalitions. So this is a cross-sector statement and campaign that's working to advance bold climate solutions at the national level. And you can click on the ecoAmerica or Blessed Tomorrow website and click on the momentous icon and sign your name. It's another way to add power and voices to the work that we're all doing. And it's a simple 5-second activity. So I encourage you to do that today if you haven't already. And make sure you're checking out both Brit Hazon's effort and Hazon and Brit Hazon, but Hazon's effort generally, the Seal of Sustainability, and also Green the Church's websites, and share this webcast and all of the resources that we've talked about today with others who might be able to be helped by these testimonies and the resources that have been offered. So we're at our end of our time today, but I hope this has inspired you. For all of our listeners, please click on the link to the survey when this is done. And if you're watching us online, you can actually click below and provide feedback and let us know what you think in the description. Engage with us online using the hashtag Let's Talk Climate, and be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all of the latest thought leadership resources and episodes on climate action and advocacy. I also want to make sure just again to talk about all of the previous Let's Talk Climate episodes are on our YouTube page, and also that wealth of additional conversation on today's topic and more from the sessions at the 2021 American Climate Leadership Summit. And again, that's all available on demand on ecoAmerica's YouTube channel. So from all of us at ecoAmerica and Blessed Tomorrow, thank you very much. Your passion is important, your commitment is needed, and we are with you and support you. So we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Beautiful. Thank you all. So good to be with you.
Thank you so much.